हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको रॉबर्ट ब्राउनिंग के लॉन्ग आंसर के बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन फर्स्ट, गिव द क्रिटिकल अप्रिसिएशन ऑफ द पोएम द लास्ट राइड टुगेदर। आंसर, डेट एंड पब्लिकेशन। हेडिंग है अ लॉन्ग पोएम ऑफ 10 स्टेंजा, द लास्ट राइड टुगेदर इज वन ऑफ द बेस्ट पोएम्स ऑफ ब्राउनिंग. It is in the form of dramatic monologue. It was first published in 1855 in Men and Women. 8 years later, it was again published and included in dramatic romances. Heading है as a dramatic monologue. A dramatic monologue is a study of character and mental status and moral crisis made from the inside. Thus, it is predominantly psychological, analytical, meditative, and argumentative. In this form of the poem, the lyrical and the dramatic elements are fused. The speaker is some imaginary person speaking to an imaginary listener. To quote Young, this is a kind of comprehension, so soliloquy, absorbing into its substance by the speaker's keenly observant glance the surroundings, scenery and audience, bringing all that permit to the chosen moments by the channel of memory, arguments, curiosity and association, adding though the deep graven lines which habit has incised upon character, which much which the soul would fain conceal, or is even unconscious of the necessity or concealing and enriching the current of its self-revealing speech with the product of any other emotion which may have been powerful enough to share in the fashioning of this critical movement. The Last Ride Together is a dramatic monologue, and it shows Browning at his best in the handling of this poetic form. It has also been called a dramatic lyric. It is spoken by a lover who loved his lady over a long period of time, and who, after making him wait for so long, finally rejected him and turned to another lover. The lover then prayed to her to grant two requests of his: first that he should remember his love of her, and secondly that she should come with him for a last ride together. To his great joy, the lady consented. The lover also thinks that his lot is superior to that of the poets, soldiers, painters, sculptors, etc. His ideal is to get the company of his beloved. As they ride along, the lover experiences a heavenly life bliss. His soul, which had lost its happiness, and on which grief had left its ugly marks and wrinkles, now smoothen itself out like a crumpled sheet of paper which opens out and flutters in the wind. All his hopes of success in love, all hopes of a very happy life with his beloved, were now dead and gone. His love was now a matter of the past, but lover does not despair. He shares Browning's optimism and says that it is no use to regret or to feel sorry for a life which has been ruined. What is ended cannot be mended. It is no use speculating over his possible success. It is just possible that had he acted differently, instead of loving him, She might have hated him, now she is only indifferent to him. Now at least she rides by his side. He derives consolation from this fact instead of brooding sadly over the dead past. The lover of then reflects over a lot of humanity in general and derives further consolation from the fact that he is not the only one who has failed in life. Such is the lot of men, that all try but none succeed, all labor but all fail ultimately to achieve their ends. How little of success and achievement, and how much of failure does the whole world show. He is lucky in the sense that at least he rides by the side of his beloved. Others do not get even that much of success. There is always a void desperately between conception and execution, between ambition and achievement. Human will is seldom transformed into action. Human limitation always hamper action and the achievement of one's desires. No one gets an adequate reward for his achievement. The only rewards, even the of the most successful statesman, is a short obituary notice, and that of a heroic warrior only an epitaph over his grave in the Westminster Abbey. The poet no doubt achieves much. He expresses human thoughts and emotions in a sweet, melodious language, but he does not get any of the good things of life. He lives and dies in poverty. The great sculptor and musician too are failures. From even the most beautiful piece of sculpture, say a statue of the goddess Venus, one turns to an ordinary but a living, breathing girl, and fashion in music are quick to change. Comparatively, he is more successful, for he has at least been rewarded with the company of his beloved. At least he has the pleasure of riding with her on the horse. It is difficult to say what is good and what is not good for a man in the world. Achievement of perfect happiness in this world means that one would have no hopes left for life in the other world. Failure in this world is essential for success and achievement in the life to come. He has failed in this life, but this is blessing in disguise. It means that he would be successful in the life to come. He can now hope for happiness in the other world to come after death, because he did not get his beloved here. He is sure to enjoy the bliss of her love in the life after death. Hence, he wishes that their riding together may become an eternal moment. Next, heading expression of Browning's philosophy, optimism. The monologue lay before us the soul of the lover as he mused over his past failure in love, his bliss in the present, and his hopes for the future. We get a peep into his soul. He is a heroic soul who is not discouraged by his failure in love. He derives consolation from failure itself. He shares the poet's cheerful optimism, his faith in the immortality of the soul, and believes like him that God creates the love to grant the love. It is better to die without a glory garland round one's neck, for there is a life beyond, and one should have some hope left for it. Browning philosophy here is a great deal like Hinduism, his belief in the life after death. Heading as a love poem. This monologue has been praised as an excellent love poem. W. H. Phelps calls it one of the greatest love poems in all literature. As John T. Nettleship tells us, it deals with love as an aspiration which was not to be realized here at all but must have its completion in the other life. Harford regards its passion as of rarer and more difficult kind than that of Evelyn Hope. It is a poem of unrequited love in which there is nothing but the noblest resignation. There is no despair, no wounded pride, and no anger. The lover says he has the ideal in his heart. It shall be cherished as the occupant of his heart's throne forever. Of the ideal at least he can never be deprived. The poem illustrates the truth of Hartford's opinion that in Browning's poetry the tragedy of love is only the woman, while his lovers have his own supple optimism, his analytic dissipating fancy infused into his portrayal of the grief pains of his own sex. But according to S. A. Brooke, there is a defect in this poem. He writes, the lover in the poem thinks more of his own thoughts than of women by his side, who must have somewhat varied by so silent a companion. Intellectual analysis and argumentation come in the way of emotional intensity. Then there is an admirable testimony of Simmons, who says that this poem is one of those love poems which are especially noble and unique, and is certainly the noblest and most truly unique of them all. Heading style and versification. The poem is absolutely free from the usual faults of Browning. There is no obscurity. The language is clear, simple, and lucid. There is no display of learning, no unusual far-fetched comparison, and no excessive use of parentheses. The poem contains a number of memorable phrases: the petty done and the vast undone, and the instant made in eternity, the images of the billow-bosomed cloud and of the poet's soul opening out like a cramped scroll are exquisite. The poem also brings out Browning's skill as a metrist in the long-drawn rhythm of its verse. The poet has succeeded in capturing the steady stride of the heroes as they carry along their respective riders. As we read the poem, we seem to hear the very gallop of the two horses. The rhythmic beat of the verses accords well with the thought, mood, and movement of the poem. The poem consists of 10 stanzas of 11 lines each. Each line has 8 syllables and is divided into 4 feet. In some lines, 1 or 2 extra syllables are also used for variation and effect. The rhyming scheme of each stanza is A, B, B, C, D, D, E, E, E. Question 2. Give the critical appreciation of the poem Ravi Van Ezra. Answer. Heading: a background of the poem. Ravi Van Ezra was first published in 1864, 3 years after the death of Mr. Browning. Mrs. Browning, the poet, was gloomy and contemplating about life and death. He had read Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, translated by Edward Fitzgerald into English. He disapproved the hedonist philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry as propounded by Khayyam and wanted to contradict it. Ravi Venejra thus was composed as a contradiction to and in opposition of the hedonist philosophy. Second heading is philosophical poem. Ravi Venejra is a deep philosophical poem of Robert Browning. It has been called a great song of life by C.H. Herford, the most quintessential of the distinctively physical monologues which Browning has written by another critic. It depicts poets' philosophic thoughts about youth, old age, human soul, the purpose of life, the ultimate destiny of man, and his life beyond death. This long poem describes Browning's spiritualism and implicit faith in God. The poet wishes us to keep aloof from the contamination of the world and dedicate to the service of God. The pleasure of the present day life are fleeting and transient. Man should not run after them. He should prepare himself for the next world. The four important aspects of Browning's philosophy expressed in this poem are illustrated below. First, faith in the organic wholeness of human life, that youth is consummated in old age, and hence the value and significance, the value of struggle, which alone can lead to achievement and spiritual development. Third, faith in death, which is the gateway to the life in the other world, and which is the end and the consummation of life in this world. Fourth, faith in God and in the immortality of human soul in the perpetual flux of circumstances. Our times are in his hand, who said, a whole I planned. Second, perfect I call thy plan. Thanks that I was a man maker. Remake complete. I trust what thou shalt do. Perfect thy cup is planned. Let us let age approve of youth and death complete the same. Heading a development of thought. According to May Wilson, Ravi Venejra is a poem in which the thinker is subordinated to the thought. It is consequently personal rather than dramatic and represents Browning's theism, though not of course his Christianity, though an imaginary utterance of the great Ravi. The leading ideas are: first, the value of age is that it consummates life and is epic, whence youth may be reviewed, understood, and harmonized. Second, the use of strife and trial is that they attest our higher nature and our kinship with the Father of Spirit. Third, the absolute solitariness of each soul in relation to God and its independence of earthly estimates. Allied with this is the enduringness of the soul amid the perpetual flux of circumstances. Man must take his means from the present. His aim, man being figured by a cup, is solely to slake God's thirst. W. L. Phelps gives a lucid account of the development of the thought in the poem. The drawbacks and suffering of life are a part of divine machinery employed by him in his infinite wisdom to further human development, to make man ultimately fit to see his face. There can be no true progress without overcoming obstacles, no enjoyment without sorrow and suffering, no vacation without duties, no virtue without sin. Heading a great religious poem. This poem has been regarded as the finest meditative and reflective poem in English language. It has been called a great religious poem. Admiring it, Arthur Simpson has said that in Rabi Ben Ezra, Browning has criticized his religious philosophy into the shape of avoiding beauty. It has been called not rashly the noblest of modern religious poems, like in substance and in form. It belongs to the higher order of meditative poetry, and it has in Browning's work an almost unique of great beauty, of severe restraint, of earnest and measured enthusiasm. What the psalm of life is to the people who do not think Ravi Ben Ezra might and should do be those who do a light through the darkness, a lantern of guidance and a beacon of hope to the wanderer lost and weary. To quote Hugh Walker, there is no dogma in his Browning's utterance, nothing distinctive of the Jewish or even of the Christian faith. What he says might be appropriately but into the mouth of a Socrates or of St. Francis of Assisi, for the purest religion is of any creed or of none. The poem is embodiment of all that is deepest in Browning's philosophy of religion and all that is highest in his mortality. Now where else except in the pop of the ring and the book can we be so sure that we have Browning on thought just the best that he can conceive, unaltered and unmodified by dramatic conditions. So the religious beliefs and ideas expressed in the poem are not sectarian but universal. They are the juice of the true good and the beautiful. Having the note of optimism, Browning's message in Rabi Ben Ezra is that of optimism. The poet is aware of sorrow and suffering of man. He knows man's cares and anxieties, pangs and agonies, failure and disappointment. Yet he teaches that failure leads to hope. Failure in this life means success in the life to come. We are in the hands of God, and the Almighty will certainly give us overdue. All I could never be, all men ignored in me. This I was worth to God, whose will the preacher saved in the poem. He again and again affirms the nobility and superiority of man. Rejoice, we are allied to that which both provide and not partake, effect and not receive. Browning's dramatic monologue are written in blank verse, but his blank verse has a freshness of its own. It is half familiar, vivid with natural life, full of vigor and beauty, rising and falling with the unrearing motion of the sea, from depth to height, from height to depth, now level and smooth and shining, now rough with thickening foam, blown by the winds of passion, of lulled with the falling breeze. If he has not exactly created blank verse, he has certainly adapted, perfected and made it a new thing in his hands as a piece of metrical writing. It has all the originality of an innovation. He has concentrated truth and imaginative realism in his dramatic monologue. It is in his volume Man and Woman 1835 that he has perfected the dramatic monologue. Next heading है characteristics of his monologue. The rapid survey of Browning's monologue reveals his skill in the use of this form as well as the distinctive feature of his art and technique. He uses this form for the study of character, of particular mental states, and of moral crisis in the soul of the characters concerned. In these monologue, the poet depicts an amazingly wide variety of characters taken from all walks of life: coward, roguish, artist, scholar, dukes, cheats, beggars, murderer, and saint like Peppa. All crowd his picture gallery. His character belong not to any one country and age, but to a number of countries and ages. In each monologue, one character is at the center, and the substance of the monologue consists of what passes within his soul. His monologues provide us with a peep into the inner working of the mind and soul of these characters. Since some listeners are present for most of the time without performing any dramatic function except that of the interlocutor, those dramatic monologue but Browning become soliloquy or conversation. Often the nature background is skillfully interwoven with the mood and temper of the speaker, and in this way the total effect is highlighted. For example, in Andrea del Sarto, the speaker's reference to the autumnal grey nature background are used to heighten his own mood of depression and world weariness. The speaker's thought range from the past to the future, and the unity is emotional rather than logical, and the language used is that of the informal task brothers language. It is often telegraphic, and the niceties of grammar and syntax are ignored. The manner is sometimes lyrical and emotional, sometimes narrative and descriptive, and at other times reflective and reminiscent. It is in accordance with the mood of the speaker. It is worth noting that the monologues are written mostly in verse, free and vigorous in rhythm, racy and actual, bristling with colloquialism. T.S. Young's it is sometimes said that Browning's monologues are satires upon their respective speaker, but Chatron disagrees with such a opinion. In his opinion, the monologues are not satires upon their subject. They are not even harsh or unfeeling exposure of them. They are defenses. The last right together is a defense of the lover, and Andrew Del Sarto offers an excuse for the painter's maltreatment of his parents. In his earlier monologues, Browning is primarily concerned with character portrayal. In his later monologue, he is primarily concerned with case making. Browning character plead and advocate their cases very well. Heading है the subjective note. Though the monologues are dramatic, yet they have a subjective note in as much as they reveal his philosophy of life, his view on good, God, and the immortality of the soul, etc. Such subjectivity is unavoidable in if verse form, which requires the poet to lend his own mind to his character to enable them to defend their action. Modern note in language and style in psychoanalysis presented in these monologues. Browning anticipates and the modern note and the modern impressionistic technique. Both past and future are yoked together. Time is not chronologically developed. Next question is write a note on Browning philosophy of life. Heading है, a philosophic poet. Critic often speaks of the message of Browning or the teaching of Browning. However, Browning has no formal message, no church, no philosophy in the technical sense, but he had definite and firm view on human life and human nature and of the relation of both to God. He saw what Frederick Rayland calls a philosophic poet in his poetry. He offers us a distinct theory of the relation of man to the universe and exhibits this theory by means of imagery, characters, and scenes. Heading his consistency and originality. He may not have been a very profound thinker, but he is a very constant one. His philosophy of life was shaped as early as Pauline, and it remained unchanged up to the very end. Browning's poetry is characterized by immense variety, but unity is imparted to it by his unchanging view of human destiny. He certainly does not challenge the old theological and metaphysical dogmas. On the whole, he accepts the conventional view of God, the immortality of the soul, and the Christian belief in incarnation. Still, he is original in the sense that his cheerful optimism is in sharp contrast with the growing pessimism of the age. He is one of those who rolled back as far as England is concerned the morbid pessimism, the silky disdain of active life which has infected so much of European literature during the present century. Rayland heading a cheerful optimist. Browning is a cheerful optimist. Optimist is at the very core of his teaching and his view of human life. Contrary to the view of some critics, his optimism is not blind. He does not shut his eyes to the suffering and evil that is in life. It is not a cheap optimism, it is founded on the realities of life. Browning knows, says Campton Ricketts, that human life is a bewildering mixture of good and evil, of the lonely and the ugly, of despair and hopefulness, but he derives hope from this every incompleteness and imperfection of life. Adding a human imperfection, the basis of Browning optimism. Browning's optimism, says Chesterton, is founded on imperfection of man. He derives hope from human deficiency. The famous lines in Pippa Passes, God is in his heaven, all is right with the world, are often cited as an instance of Browning's blind and cheap optimism in the face of such human suffering and misery and such wickedness. How can we say that all is right with the world? Such vices arise from the faulty interpretation of his poetry. When Browning says that all is right with the world, he does not mean that there is no suffering or evil in the world. He means that divine governance is just and benevolent, and what appears to us as evil has its own place in the scheme of things. Thus, in the words of Alexander Pope, all discord is harmony not understood, and all partial evil universal good. Having a pragmatic approach, faith in experience. However, Browning's attitude towards evil, pain, and misery is not merely theoretical and abstract like that of the 18th century thinker. He does not accept evil merely as a philosophical counterparts of good, rather he regards evil as a practical instrument of human advancement. His approach to the problem is pragmatic. It is based on his experience of life. He says stress on practical experiences and test every theory on this touchstone. Whatever enriches the experience, further aspiration gives strength to the heart and mind, is good and is to be used by us whether conventionally sanctioned or not. That which innervates paralysis deadens is bad and must be put aside. Campton records it is only by experiences that we can wring knowledge from ignorance. Having a faith in struggle, not achievement. Browning is a pessimistic adherent to the theory of evolution, and his optimism is logically justified by this theory. Life is constantly progressing to higher and higher levels. From the lowest creature, life has advanced to the level represented by man, and in the imperfection of man lies our hope of further advancement. What is loftiest and noblest is one generation is surpassed by something still loftier and therefore still truer in the next. For this advancement, progress in the moral and spiritual sense, persistent struggle with evil and necessary perfection is the ideal, but this ideal can never be wholly attained. Only greater and greater approximation to it is possible, but this failure to achieve that ideal is to be welcomed, for the birth of life lies in the effort of become perfect, not in accomplishment but in the strive to accomplish. W.T. Young, evil is our foe and no victory is possible without the foe. In other words, evil is the opportunity offered to us by the divine to advance spiritually. Evil is therefore a condition of man's moral progress. And what is our failure here but a trump evidence for the fullness of the day? Have me withered or agonized? Why else was the pause prolonged but that singing might issue thence? Why rushed the discard in but that harmony should be prized? Having a struggle with evil and moral progress. This is the way in which Browning absorbs evil into theory of life, of which love is the fundamental principle. He does not pronounce with the facile optimism of Hope and Bolingbroke that whatever is right, but rather that whatever is wrong, for the excellent purpose that we may put it right and in the effort acquire new moral power. Then welcome each revolve that turns earth's smoothness rough, each sting that bites, nor sit nor stand but go. Be our joys 3 parts span, strive and hold cheap the strain, learn nor account the pang, dare never brood the throne. Evil is as permanent as good, and therefore man is literally ever a fighter facing adventurous, brave and new, for whom the signal is in Browning's following poetic utterance. Strive and thrive, cry speed, fight on, fear ever there as here, having this life a preparation for the next. In Ravi Vanejra, we have the most explicit statement of Browning's philosophy of life. It is an epitome of many poems. It looks on life from the standpoint of age. It is in youth that begin the experiences which helps us later on in our spiritual progress. It is not accomplishment but intention, not the outward result but the inward aim. That is the real test of birth. The picture is now shaped on the wheel and is thus ready for a future, for a life beyond this life. This life is a preparation for the life to come, and evil and suffering and failure in this life are to be welcomed, for it is only through failure that man can enjoy the pleasure of heaven. In Evelyn Hope, the lover does not despair. He derives consolation from the optimistic faith that God creates the love to reward the love. True love is sure to be rewarded in the life after death, if not in this life, having a immortality of the soul. In other words, Browning firmly grounded optimism is further strengthened by his faith in the immortality of the soul. The body may die, but the soul lives on in the infinite. It has an afterlife, or lives. It has experiences not only in the world and this life but also in countless lives to come. Life in the other world, life with the infinite, is far more valuable than life in this finite world. Success in this world means failure in the other world, and the ideal which is attainable here is worthless, for by attaining it we lost the divine, having a hope based on failure and imperfection. Similarly, he who believing that man has forever lives now for dogs and apes is sure to be incomprehensive to the world, to fail by its standard, and this is the kind of failure that Browning so constantly exalts. This high man with a great thing to pursue dies ere he knows it. That low man goes on adding one to one. His hundreds soon hit. This high man aiming at a million misses an ant. Failure of this kind is a Professor Henry Jones has it the last word, but one it is expressed in different words in Andrew Del Sarto. But but a man's reach should exceeded his grasp, or what's heaven for? We come here upon the confirmation of the doctrine that imperfection and failure are man glory, the ideal which the soul illumines are beacons in the far distance. Their attent attainability is both the prophecy and the instigation of progress. In having an intention and efforts their value. It follows likewise that judgment and is passed not on the things accomplished, not on the vulgar mass called bulk, must sentence pass things done that took the eyes and hand the prices, but upon the impulses, the intention, the novelty of soul which prompt the attempt and which may only emerge into clear consciousness when eternity affirms the conception of an hour. All I could never be, all men ignored in me. This I was birth to God, whose will the picture shaped. What is attempted in such a spirit cannot be completed in the limited spheres of the temporal. On the earth there are the broken arch in the heaven, a perfect round Heading Death, the gateway of heaven to heaven. In the light of this conception, death becomes not the herald of extinction but a groom that brings a taper to the outward room where the soul may pursue its design unfettered and unhindered. This is the faith which inspired the epilogue to Asolando, and for sudden the worst turned the best of to the brave, the black minutes at end, and the elements raised the fiend voices that rave shall dwindle, shall blend, shall change, shall become first a piece out of pain, then a light, then thy breast. O thou soul of my soul, I shall clasp thee again with and with God be the rest. Having a God faith in his love and mercy. These lines also brings out Browning's firm faith in God. He never questions the existence of a supreme authority or God controlling the manifold energies of the world. Even his nymphs and rocks have firm faith in God and rely upon his perfection and his mercy. They constantly talk to their relation with him and are sure of ultimate union with the absolute sympathetic communion. According to Browning, between man and God is possible because in addition to his attributes of power and knowledge, he has the highest attribute of all, the attribute of love. It is love for which kindles and exalts both knowledge and power, and as love is common both to God and man, it is through love that man touches the infinite. It is love which harmonies and unites all living beings, and it is on love that all Browning's characters build their faith. God, thou art love, I build my faith in on that. And further, so the all great where the all loving to the world is beautiful for good. God created it out of the fullness of his love. O world, as God has made it, all is beauty, and knowing this is love, and love is duty. Life in this world is worth living, for both life and the world are the experiences of divine love, adding a zest for life, joy in nature. Browning's optimism is further seen in the fact that he finds the passion of joy running in all nature. Joy is at the every core of nature, and Browning is never tired of emphasizing this fact. This joy in nature is derived from the creative joy of God, the delight he takes in the work of creation. Nature is being made incessantly, and from this result the joyful rush of life in all things. Browning ecstasy in mere living, his rapturous joy in his own life and in the life of nature result from his faith in the creative joy of the Supreme. Hugh Walker says that no one has sang more fervently than he of the delight of life. David in Saul, Pippa Passes, Fra Lippo Lippi, and a host of other characters are keenly alive to the pleasure of living. Ravi Venezra condemned the ascetic negation of the flesh and assert the necessity and moral unfulness both of the flesh and soul. As the word wings and sings, let us cry all good things are our, nor soul help flesh more now than flesh help soul. Adding a Browning message. To conclude, Browning's message is no one of invincible faith and optimism. He spoke the strongest word of faith in an age of doubt and pessimism. His energy, his cheerful courage, his faith in life and in the development that awaits us beyond the portals of death are like a bungle call to good living. Long of all English poets, no other is so completely, so consciously, so magnificently a teacher of men. He retained his faith and courage in a world of doubt and timidity for 30 years. He faced cheerfully the indifference of his age and unlimitedly made the world recognize and follow him. His thought has been surely and steadily taking possession of the heart of educated men and women, and this accounts for his increased popularity both at home and abroad. Thanks, best of luck.